Let's do this fucking thing. Talk about this godforsaken baseball team. All right. You good? And welcome back to another episode of the Amazin Citi. It's Antonio Slater and Jack Ramsey. Episode Who Gives a Damn? Jack, there's no two ways around this. Things are not good right now. You won 5 straight. Things looked as good as it was
Promising.
gonna get. Things look promising. There are 3 games over 500, 3 games back from first place. You know, I had a series with Toronto, who's been up and down all year, and then Atlanta was just like, okay, maybe by the end of that, you're in a position to either take first place or at least get a
You're in
share of
it.
it and tie it.
You're in it.
You're in it. You're in it. All you do is just not look like a bunch of assholes on a field for a week, and you're in contention for first place as we enter the middle of June. But what do? Instead of continuing the riding high of the momentum, you go from winning 5 straight to losing 7 consecutive games. You get swept at home by Toronto. You get swept by Atlanta after leading every game by 3 or more runs. You still lose all 3 games. And then you got your shit pushed in by 75-year-old Rich Hill and the Pittsburgh Pirates, who are just coming off losing a series at home to the Oakland Athletics. Oh, by the way, Pete Alonso's on the injured list. Things aren't good.
No, and I think I kind of said this.
That might be the most depressing intro I've had in the 60 some odd episodes we had of this freaking podcast.
I've made this point before. I always kind of thought 2023 was going to be a bit of a retool year for the Mets, just because, Mark Canha wasn't going to put up another 3-win year. Starling Marte was coming off big injuries. There's a lot of risk with the way the roster was constructed, which is not to bash roster construction. Like we've all said a million times. Steve Cohen came out and said, I have to spend a lot of money to contend in the interim while we work on building an infrastructure.
Right.
But with that comes there's a lot of risk when your top 3 starters or your top 2 are both 40.
Mm-hmm.
Your number 3 starter presumably is making his big league debut coming over from overseas, and your 4 and your 5 are also in their mid to late 30s. And
we haven't even seen one of those guys yet.
Right,
Quintana.
and so there
he's
was
throwing
always
bullpens. He's getting close, but we haven't
always
seen him on a
a
mound.
high risk roster.
Right.
And it's weird because if I told you in May that Tommy Pham would have an 800 OPS in the second week of June, Francisco Alvarez would have 12 homers, Pete Alonso would have 22 homers, Lindor would already be in double-digit homers. Like, Lindor might hit 35 homers this year.
He's on pace for 30 and 110.
Yeah.
Or something like in that ballpark.
Right. Like, if I had told you
should be career highs, by the way.
All right, if I had told you all this, you would have thought I was like, oh my God, the Mets are in great shape. This is a contending team that's pushing for either a division title or a pennant.
Right.
So it's it's deflating in a lot of
now
ways.
You're getting choked up.
I mean, I think the biggest issue with this team, there's aside from Alonso, Lindor, and Alvarez, there is no power. They've lost their gap to gap power. McNeil and Nimmo, and to a point, Beatty are not getting the extra base hits that you would want to see from guys that are probably as constructed your third, fourth, fifth, sixth best hitters in the lineup.
Right.
I mean, right now it's Alonso when healthy and Alvarez. And after that, it is kind of a hodgepodge, but McNeil has lost most all of his power. There's nothing in the gaps, no extra base hits. Marte has gone down the same route. There's been regression from Canha, but you don't even think you'd have to be at a point where you have to sit here and go, well, if Mark Canha was playing better, like you didn't think you'd have to be at that point. And even then in the bullpen, it's a strong back end.
Yeah,
Robertson's been good. Ottavino's been fine.
Robertson's been fantastic.
Smith
I know
has looked great.
I know he blew the save, but
right. But Robertson, I mean, that even then,
excellent this year.
That
and
is
you're also asking a 38-year-old to get a 5-out save.
Right, and that's part of the trickle down effect from the next point I was going to make of the sixth, seventh, eighth relievers in the pen you can't use in certain spots.
Right.
I mean, if you're in a high leverage spot, you can bring in Robertson, Ottavino, Smith, Rayleigh, and Brigham. They're trying to work Leone into some of those spots earlier in the game, a big spot in the sixth or the seventh, and they've been able to at times. Like before the homer to Belt, he had gone what, six straight scoreless outings with like 11, 12 strikeouts.
Yeah, he looks solid.
Yeah, he looked like a legitimate like bullpen option for the Mets. And then the regression. So it's been, the back end of the roster has been what's killed the Mets. The front end has not helped, but what has killed them has been the back end of the roster. David Peterson going from being a fastball changeup to get to the slider guy to slider to get to fastball changeup has been awful and one of the worst experiments the Mets have tried in a while. McGill just does not look like high end major league depth, which is upsetting even just thinking about it. I mean, I know people were fooling themselves into thinking he was like a legit number 3 for them, 2 years ago because of a good start, but you're hoping he could hold the fort down if someone was hurt for a little bit, and granted, the returns on Peterson since he's gone back to AAA have been fine. I mean, it's a weird league with a lot of weird stuff going on there, so you're just trying to work on, it's almost like a spring training approach of, all right, I got to work on my slider this outing. If I give up 7 runs, I give up 7 runs, but I'm going to get my slider right. So, but it seems like they're flipping him back to fastball changeup to get the slider. I don't know why they were flipped it in the first place, but I mean, even just guys like John Curtis not being as good as it seemed like he could be.
Right.
Nogosic either being one of the best long men in baseball or absolute garbage.
Yeah, he just got DFA'd.
Right. So and then it's not even that's without getting into Denny Reyes,
Right.
Tommy Hunter. There's just they're not in a good spot. But the more confusing part of it is even just looking at the bullpen. All right, fine. These guys suck. Tommy Hunter's not getting it done. Dom Leone is a dime a dozen. We literally pulled him off the streets. Stuff like that. If you decide that's a failed experiment, I just don't get then turning to guys like Zach Muckenhirn, who, no disrespect, Muckenhirn, it's a long journey for him, a long process, and he finally got to the show. Good for him. But he doesn't have a future with the team. When you have 23-year-old Nate Lavender in AAA with like a 2.5 ERA on the year and like a 110 whip.
Yeah.
A high strikeout lefty. He's striking out like 15 guys per 9. So I just don't understand why that's not the call. It's one thing to be bad. It's another thing to be bad and old. And I think that's the problem the Mets are facing right now. And I think almost the best thing they can do for themselves right now is just keep going on this pace. A team that's going to be around 500. Because I think just seeing where they are right now and the production they're getting out of some of these guys, Carrasco's not going to be back next year. Robertson probably won't. Depending on the option, Rayleigh might not. Escobar, Hanna, Pham, Vogelbach, like these are all guys that just aren't going to be back next year.
Right.
So the best thing that I think the best case scenario for the Mets right now is to get to the deadline. They sell off for this year, buy in for next year. If you can sell off a guy like a Carrasco, try and get a pen arm for him, or like someone you think there's something with. That's why I give the Mets, like the Mets got Brigham for nothing. A Dominican pitcher that throws hard, but I don't think I'm blanking on his name, but I think it was Franklin Sanchez. I'm not sure how much of a future he has in 30 million-year-old Jake Mangum. And meanwhile, Brigham has looked pretty good for him. I hate to be his savant page is bright red, he's great type of guy. But there's a lot of data that suggests there is something there, and it is flashed more than once. If it wasn't for Coors, he'd have an ERA in the 2s right now. So
But
I
like,
think
here's my
the best
thing.
thing they can do is just start working towards next year, because part of building an infrastructure and becoming the Dodgers or the Braves is, the Braves won a World Series in 2021, but think about their deadline. It was Eddie Rosario. It was Jock Peterson. It was, I think, did they trade for Pablo Sandoval at the deadline?
I, I think they did, but they traded for 4 outfielders because their entire outfield was hurt.
Right,
Forget
I think
I
they
forget the
traded for
4 that they were,
Duvall,
but Duvall was in there, I think.
but they made very minimal moves.
Right.
So as you know, maybe, yeah, if we catch lightning in a bottle, sure. If the teams around us all fall apart, and that's what happened. They caught lightning in the bottle, the Mets and the Phillies fell apart. And they ended up winning the fucking World Series.
And that's kind of my point here is just like it's June 10th. For me, it's way too early to talk about selling pieces, especially when
The National League is
like
painfully mediocre.
it's painfully bad, dude. It's not just mediocre, it's bad.
I mean, your
The
legit
Mets,
contenders are the Braves, the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks.
as bad as the Mets are right now, they're 4 games out of a wild card spot. You have a good 2 weeks, you're in the wild card position.
Yeah, I mean, the third wild card, the wild cards right now are the Dodgers, a legit contender,
Sure.
the Marlins, who aren't 6 games over if they play 500 in one-run games.
Right.
They're a
Because
500, like they're a 500 team, if not under, if they play 500 in one-run games.
I think they're like 16-2 or something
Yeah,
absurd
and the
in one-run
Brewers, who
games.
have been very touch and go this year. Then
Right.
you have the Giants, who have been touch and go. The Phillies, who if they hadn't, who have won 6 in a row to get to one under 500 after being in last place last week. The painfully disappointing Padres and the
Right.
painfully disappointing Mets.
Right.
Then you have the Reds, the Cubs, the Cardinals, Nats, Rockies. So I mean, if you
The
want to
National League
talk,
is bad.
if you want to talk deadline, I think as of June 10th, their approach should be sell off for this year, buy in for next year. Because no matter what,
But
you
with
need
the
to
third
get.
wild card and with the aggressiveness that team has showed, they're not selling pieces off. If we're in a similar spot, we're July 20th instead of June 10th, and they're 3.5, 4 games out of wild card, they're not selling. They're gonna buy.
But
We
it's a
both know
question
this.
of. But the question becomes: are the pieces? Where are the upgrades? Can you just simply upgrade by shedding off dead weight and bringing up someone from the minors?
Right.
I mean, if you cut, I'll use Dylan Hall for example. He's a 25-year-old reliever in Syracuse who's like a 2.4 ERA this year.
Mm-hmm.
Misses some good bats. He has a whip at like 1.1, 1.5, 1.2. He's probably an upgrade over Tommy Hunter. I
It's
get
a
it.
low
Everyone's
bar,
an
but
upgrade over him,
yeah.
but that's an
Like we were
immediate
watching
up.
the game yesterday, and someone was just like, "Why aren't they putting in a position player?" I'm like, Tommy Hunter is probably worse than a position player right now. It's no
Yeah,
offense to the guy. He's been outside of this year, Tommy Hunter has been way above serviceable in his time with the Mets. But in 2023, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's back again. I don't know if it's what happened. It's not working.
no, I mean, and you respect him for still doing it. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely, man.
especially
Like
after
shit.
I think it was the Healy article where like he couldn't get out of bed some days because of how bad the near paralysis was.
His backs, he's had like 9 back problems, dude.
Right. So like again, I respect it, but
Yeah, of course.
spade's a spade.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question of where are the immediate upgrades.
Right.
If like is there a point where you honestly think Danny Mendick on the bench is a better option than Mark Canha? Stuff like that. So you're selling off pieces for this year, getting legitimately anything in return for a guy who's not coming back next year,
Mm.
and seeing what you have with guys who are under contract. And I think that's gonna be one of their biggest things. Is you're gonna have to look at guys aside from the obvious of Mauricio. At some point, do you get Mike Vassell up? If the
Right.
Mets are like in the 4 or 5 games out range in July, I would say trade Carlos Carrasco. You know,
Especially listen, with how he's pitching, you could probably get a decent return for him.
right, you can get a living body for
Contenders
a
always
guy.
look for arms.
Right, and I think the key right now is if you're looking at guys like Escobar, like Canna, like Carrasco, like Ottavino or Robertson, guys like that, like if you can get living bodies for them, guys that you know for a fact won't be on the team next year. You know, aside, I mean, some of them have options. I can't think off the top of my head. I know Canna and
If you can
Ottavino
get
do.
literally any living body,
I mean, remember when they got
a freaking ball boy for Daniel Vogelbach, I think
right, and that's what it comes down
that's a
to is
fleece.
getting an actual return for some of these guys might just be enough, you know. And even then, if like I was saying, if you get Matt Rudick up, who's got like a 900 OPS in a very strong Eastern League, which
Mhm.
aside from the actual major leagues is the strongest league to play in Major League Baseball and all of its affiliates. Getting him up and just seeing what you have while also being able to get a return for a Mark Canna,
Mhm.
you know, seeing what you got in Danny Mendick or Jose Peroza while getting something in return for Eduardo Escobar. I mean, because there's give and there's get. You know, I think about the move Sandy made for AJ Ramos. You know, if he hadn't gotten hurt, that would have been a big piece in the 2018 Mets bullpen.
Sure.
You know, and obviously you feel you feel the lack of Diaz this year and all that, but adding in Ibn Diaz suddenly isn't a strong competitive Mets team. It
I
fixes
think
some of the
it
bullpen problems.
yeah,
It deepens the bullpen for sure,
absolutely.
but you
It'll be
still
nice to have the
have
best closer in baseball, but
right, you still have two, maybe three very questionable spots in your bullpen.
right.
So I think the Mets need to do a lot of looking in the mirror, you know, and like I said, I mean, you got to give guys a shot to see what you have.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't put up some of the numbers in the Eastern League that guys like Vassell, Perosa, and Rudick are by mistake. Not in the Eastern League. You know, Double A is the most competitive minor league level, so you need to give these guys shots. And even then, if just having the options, because their depth isn't good right now. That's another part of the problem is their outfield depth is, you know, Danny Mendick,
Yeah.
and uh, then Matt Rudick. Like that is the depth. That is your depth. I mean, and you can't keep spending high end money on these relievers. I mean, it's nice that you have the money that you can do that, but it's not a sustainable baseball operation. So at some point you can't go out and have to spend 15, $20 million on two relievers every year. I mean, Ottavino got like what, 8 million, Robertson got 10. Like you can't be spending $20 million on just two relievers every year. You
Right.
can't go out and drop 15 million a year on the Jose Quintanas of the world every year just because you don't have the rotational depth to do it or to not do that. So getting a guy like a Mike Bassel who can be like a legitimate number 4 starter is
Mhm.
huge. So it's just about figuring out what you do and don't have in the upper levels of the minors. And I just think regardless of what they end up doing, that should be part of their plan. Seeing where you can shed off some of these veterans.
Mhm.
You know, Tommy Pham might get you a nice return at this point for a rental.
I
I
mean,
mean,
he's been hitting the ball.
the dude's killing lefties. He's playing a
Shout out to
decent
his
enough
optometrist,
outfield.
man.
He's playing a decent enough outfield. He's got legit power still.
Yeah.
That's I mean he's
He's
a fourth.
fourth on the team in homers.
He's
It's
a
not saying
I
much,
mean
but
on a legit playoff contender, he's still a fourth outfielder.
probably, yeah.
And teams need that. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I don't think there's ever a year under Steve Cohen where the Mets are legitimate sellers,
Right.
but I definitely think there can be some years where you have to shed the edges of the roster.
Trim the fat.
Yeah, trim the fat and give other guys shots. You know, if even if you decide, okay, we're keeping Robertson, we're keeping Ottavino in the event we make a run, you know, and you just want to shut like you can shut off the Vogelbachs, the Canas, the Martes, not the Martes, the Escobars, and just let's see legitimately what you have. I mean, even Luis Guillorme, if he can go back to being a high OBP guy with good bat to ball skills, good barrel control, hit the occasional gapper pulling down the line. You know, his 100 OPS plus, if he can put that up again, if he can be that type of guy while playing great defense off the bench, that's an important and valuable bench piece. I mean, even if Omar Narvaez is just a 700 OPS guy with good defense, that is a pretty good backup catcher.
Yeah.
Considering most teams don't even have a starting catcher putting up a 700 OPS.
Yeah.
So
They really don't.
it's hard to say.
I mean, shit, Pittsburgh's running out Austin Hedges every day, and he's hitting 150. Of course, he had a 2-run double yesterday, but
still, I mean, still the overarching point being that I think they just built themselves a big enough hole at this point, and enough the ugly side of the roster has turned its face,
right.
and there's no real going back from that. So I mean, just strictly looking at the active roster, I mean, just if we're talking about the fat, Carrasco, Hunter, Leone, Muckenhern, um, Escobar, Canafan, Vogelbach. How many of those guys would you say are likely to be on the opening day roster next year? 0.
Yeah.
Maybe Pham if they try and bring him back. But even then, a good team, it's like what we say about relievers. Like a good organization makes those guys happen. But you also don't have to go out and spend $5 million every winter on Tommy Pham if you can have one of your own already in the system.
It's just so wild that we look back at our episode before the season saying that in the history of Major League Baseball, there's never been a more World Series or bust team than the 2023 New York Mets. And here we are 63 games in, and we're talking about, man, well, maybe it's time to trade some of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, and it was always such a high risk roster. It's just you hoped that it would hold together for one more year.
Yeah, and I have a problem with people saying, "Oh, it's a poorly constructed roster," because it's the same roster essentially as last year. They won 101 games. So, did you have a problem with the
And
roster last year,
I
or
think
are
the
you just saying it's
biggest
because people are
problem
losing? I'm not saying you. I'm saying like the
I
majority of Mets fans. And listen,
Mets fans
we've had
collectively aren't smart.
we've had conversations about Mets fans. There's a lot of very smart Mets fans that know what they're talking about. They're intellectual. They could have they know what they're talking about.
But they're quiet.
Yeah,
The loud fans are the idiots.
the loud majority of Mets fans. Yeah, yeah,
And I think a big problem is last year they won a lot of games in spite of questionable lineup construction, in-game decisions. And I definitely think the Mets have some of the worst management in baseball. I don't think Buck Showalter is a very good manager at this point, and I think his player usage decisions have been bad. You know, I've said it plenty of times before. Isn't Buck isn't having a lineup card handed to him by the analytics department. I
mhm,
know a lot of teams do that. The Mets don't.
right.
There are other teams in baseball that don't do that. The Mets are one of those teams. You know, there's nowhere where the analytics say start Vogelbach every day over Vientos. That isn't analytics.
No,
That's just being dumb. So there's a
that's
lot of
being a slave to the righty lefty matchup.
yeah, and there's a lot of questionable player usage decisions. And
Now Vientos hasn't been great either. Don't get me wrong; he
no,
hasn't
and
been
he's hit
spectacular.
the ball hard,
But Christ,
but I mean, it's the same problem you're having with Alvarez when he first came up. Is if you're not going to give these guys a chance to get settled and play every day. But it's just weird that I mean, I think you have reason right now to if you want to play Escobar every day at third or get him some legit run. Beatty has struggled enough that you could do that. You know, there's a decent argument for that, just based on Beatty's struggles. But the Mets are doing the right decision. The Mets have made the right decision and are letting him figure it out and work through it.
yeah,
But they're also at the same time acting like Mark Vientos is the Tommy Pham of the is the Tommy Hunter of the lineup. Like I don't know. I think the best hope is he gets some legit run and they figure it out with him.
well, I mean,
But I think
Pete
the
Alonso's out
converse
for a month, so now's his time.
Right.
Get
And
her get off the
I
pot.
mean, it's a blessing in disguise. This is going to be some legit run for him. I mean, shit, if the Mets are smart, they dangle Mauricio to some dumb team at the deadline. If the Rockies sell off Ryan McMahon or something like that.
Yeah,
That's
I
something.
just
But it's a weird crossroads of you need to give these guys a shot, and we're fighting for our season right now.
mhm.
So it's tough. I don't envy anyone in these spots.
Hmm.
I would not want to be the one to make these decisions.
I don't know, man. It's it's not great right now. It's not great. Now you even have guys like Lindor, who's one of the more shorthanded shortstops in baseball, making just boneheaded errors like he did yesterday. I appreciate the fact that he took accountability for it afterwards and said that the entire loss was on him because that changed the outlook of the entire game.
Right. And
But this is going to be, in one way or another, this 3 to 4 weeks without Alonso will make or break the Mets season. Because if you,
I'm gonna go a step further than not even say it'll make or break the Mets season. I I'd argue their season might already be broken just because there are some fundamental problems that won't just be fit that don't get fixed with just a couple weeks of winning.
fair.
I think it goes as far to it makes or breaks the future for a couple guys.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree with that as well.
Mainly being Mark Vientos.
Yes,
I mean, there's no reason he shouldn't be playing every day.
right.
I mean, their everyday configuration should be either him or Canna at first, and the days he's not at first, he's DHing.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, there's
Like,
a
I
there's a
think if you go
chance the
down the
Mets have a
lineup,
different manager when Alonso's back.
nah, I don't think so.
I don't know, man. There's been some things that I've heard and I've read that it's a ship that can sink very, very quickly.
I'm sure it can, but I also think
And I think that certain
I think
comments
the Alonso
after
injury is going to somewhat help him because, like, okay, yeah, we're struggling right now, but we're without our best hitter. We're without our 22 home run guy. So he can kind of use that to his
I
advantage a
think
little
that
bit.
sinking ship, I think the first hole was poked while he was still on the roster.
Hmm.
That last game, some comments after the last game, regardless of what context you want to throw out there.
Right.
Whatever. Oh, but this, but that. Like, no,
No.
it ruffled some feathers that really don't need to be ruffled. And it reads like one of those quotes that they tell you, take a seat. Tell us what you mean by this. You're
Yeah.
proud? You're proud of this?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter the context, just to utter, oh yeah. It's like when the Broncos would get shithoused every other week and Vance Joseph would be like, hey, well, we had a great week of practice Tuesday through Friday. Like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we were great.
Yeah.
I don't know how the 2018 Eagles dropped 55 on us. And it's like you're the problem. But I mean, it's like it's that's a ship that can sink very, very quickly. Just also considering that I don't think either side would ever really back down from each other.
Right.
Either side being, I don't think there's ever a point where Mets management would just be like, oh, okay, you meant that you're proud that we were in all three games. Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
Or where Buck would turn around and be like, well, no, I wasn't proud. I just wanted the media off my back, or I wanted positive reinforcement, or whatever.
Right. So let's go off the basis of we're going to have Alonso out for a month. So let's go to July 9th, right? Until then, it's Pittsburgh, the Yankees, the Cardinals, the Astros, the Phillies, the Brewers, the Giants, and then the D-backs and Padres. And
No,
that's the All-Star
that
break.
that is every team that is either in contention or close to contention in the National League.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't think the Mets are in contention when Alonso's back.
They gotta take man. I don't even know if
Just
500 is gonna
considering,
work.
can you just considering who you're playing in that time?
Right.
I mean, that's how many games? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. In 25 games, you probably need at the minimum 15 and 10.
And
Just consider,
that's gonna be
just,
tough to do without the
just
guy
yeah,
leading baseball in homers.
just considering the teams you're playing.
Yeah.
You need.
Now listen, they can do it because
I'm not sure if they
as
can.
we as we've said, the National League, yes, it's all the teams ahead of them in the wild card run, but it's not like any of these teams are juggernauts. They're all
No,
beatable
but
teams.
the problem is that two of them are sleeping giants. The Padres can click and run off 21 and 3.
Sure.
The Phillies might be clicking, and we look up in a month and a half and they're 10 games over 500, 15 games over, whatever.
Right.
I don't think they will, but the Cardinals have a lot of talent on their roster.
Absolutely.
So I think the Mets' problem is that if we're putting them in the same group as the Phillies, the Padres, and the Cardinals, four teams that figured to be locks for the playoffs who have been aggressively underperforming,
Mhm.
um, I think the Mets are the least likely of the group turning around. I mean, just considering, I think the Cardinals will be fine. I don't think anyone gets fired or anything like that, and they end up probably around 500. I just think they change strategy.
I think Marmol gets fired before Buck.
I don't know. I think if there's two managers in the National League that are going to get fired this year, it's Marmol and Buck.
It's hard to argue that.
But I I think part of the issue in St. Louis is they have 8 outfielders in their everyday lineup.
Yep.
And that's not on Marmol.
No, no.
And the way he handled the O'Neill stuff absolutely is the day in, day out has been awful. But he didn't give Steven Matz $50 million after one
Who's now
good
in the
year.
bullpen, by the way.
Right. I think that there is more of an overall fundamental organizational failure.
Right.
Whereas I think the Mets, under average management, probably win 3 of their last 7 games and are 3-4 in their last 7 and not 0-7. Because I think decent management manages the bullpen better
Which changes a lot.
in the last game against the Braves.
Instead of 9.5, you're like 5.5 out at that point. That changes a lot. Instead of being
Yeah,
4 back in the wild card, you
you
might be in a wild
basically
card spot.
washed. Yeah, you basically washed from the end of that Philly series. So,
Right.
but I mean, I think again, like there's just no one saw David Peterson being the worst starter in the major leagues this year coming. No one saw that coming.
Right.
No one saw all the
Right.
stuff Scherzer's had to put up with. I don't even think Scherzer looked bad against
Mhm.
Atlanta.
No.
I think he looked fine, but the Braves don't miss mistakes.
Verlander was awful.
Verlander was
there's
bad.
there
I'm not even sure what you get for Verlander right now if you try and trade him, especially
not gonna
given
get
his
mine.
money.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah.
So I think Steve might ask him to retire, but there's just it's a lot of question marks, and I'm not sure the Mets are really in contention when Alonso gets back. I think this next month will be very tough for them, and I think it'll just be constant. Darren Ruff will hit a big homer against them for the Brewers. Conforto will have a 2-homer game in New York.
Mhm.
KD Davis will hit for the cycle. Billy McKinney is going to go yard against them for the Yankees.
Right.
Shit like that. It's not just that the Mets are bad right now. They're getting kicked in the dick day in and day out. I mean, having it shoved against you by Chris Bassett. You David Robertson basically spikes a curveball and Vladdy Guerrero still hits it for a double. I
Yeah,
mean,
I didn't get to see that live. I saw the replay. I'm like,
you get first and
sometimes you
third,
gotta tip
no
your
one
cap.
out. You get first and third, no one out in the 4th inning. Then you don't get another base runner until like the 8th.
Yeah.
Like it's just a constant kick in the nuts. Of their last 7 games, if you don't want to count yesterday after the Lindor error, 5 of them were winnable, maybe
Yeah.
even 6. So and that's the other upsetting thing is you're not winning winnable games. And if you just can't win games you're supposed to, you're not a contender. And that's why I think that's why I lean right now towards the Mets not being a contender when Alonso's back. Just because they're not winning winnable games.
Hmm.
I mean, the good teams, you win the games you're supposed to, and you win some that you aren't.
And that's one of the things that they were
That's
doing
that's the
so well last
2015
year
Mets did so
is that,
well.
I mean, shit, 101 wins, you're gonna win ball games, obviously, but
Good point.
they're winning the games they're supposed to, and they're even winning the games that they weren't. Like a game like Verlander gets his shit pushed in, can't get out of the third inning, but you fight back against Spencer Strider, they win that game. I mean, granted, you score 10 runs in this era of baseball, you should win no matter what. You have a 4-run lead. I don't care in the late innings, you should win that game. That's plain and simple. But that's one of the things that they were doing so well last year is that they were winning the games they were supposed to.
Yeah, and
Just
that's
not
just
happening
something
right
they're
now.
not doing this year. They're not winning games they're supposed to win. They're not winning close games. They're not holding their own against the Braves. Legitimately, like the Mets and the Braves both won 101 games last year, and they went 9-10 in head to head. They
Right.
played as even of a season as you possibly could.
Right.
It's not like they both won 101 games, but the Braves went 12-5 against the Mets.
Yeah.
Going into the last game of the series in Atlanta, they were 9-9 against each other. And even then, the division title wasn't won until game 161.
Yeah.
Because the Marlins turned around because the Braves turned around and couldn't beat the Marlins in Miami
Mm-hmm.
or at home. So there were a lot of issues. But I think if things keep up like this, a smart team wouldn't fire their scout general manager a month before the draft.
Yeah.
And that's might be the deciding factor about who gets canned first.
Let me
Just being
can I
that,
can I get stupid real quick?
yeah,
Is there any way Steve Cohen looks at Billy Epler and says, "You're our best shot at bringing Shohei Ohtani in 2024, so I'm not going to fire you."
no, just because the Angels are good and Otani is
The
the
Angels are
only
good. Fine, that's great. That's
but
all well and good.
the only
He's not going to be an Angel in 2024. He's
I
not.
think he I think he might just because he is the only public statements he's ever made about his free agency is that he enjoys Los Angeles and he enjoys playing for the Angels. Like I just
Because
think
he
people
has to say that.
you don't have to say, "Oh my God, I love it here."
You gotta do.
Not really. I mean, Chris Bassett went on. I mean, Chris Bassett was still under contract with the Mets and was on Chris Rose's podcast. And when asked about his option, he was like, "You already know what I'm gonna do."
Right,
Like,
because that was after the season, so he had already made up his mind that was declining the
I
option.
get what you're saying, but I
If
think
if the same question was asked in on June 10th of 2022, hey Chris Bassett, do you think he'll be back with the Mets? Hey, listen, you know what I love here? I love the guys. It's a great group. What a great clubhouse. The same old song and dance bullshit that you hear from every player under contract. Nolan Arenado sang the praises of Colorado, signed the extension after a year. Was like, this place sucks. Got traded.
I don't get, but Otani's different because we're also looking at a Japanese
I'm
megastar.
I'm I'm looking at a 1% chance that Shohei Ohtani is staying with the Angels.
I'd give it a 50-50. And in that other 50%, at least 40 of it is he just goes to the Dodgers.
I think he is a Dodger. I think he's
I
going. I
think
don't.
there's minimal chance. I think just specifically to your question about Billy Epler, no, there's no chance that that's what Steve Cohen bases Epler's job security on because a good general manager should be able to sign him.
Sure.
And but what's in Epler's corner right now is he's a career long scout
Mm.
who headed a draft last year that has done decently well so far this year in the farm, has 2 top 100 prospects, and they're a month out from the draft where their scouting director is in his first year running the draft.
And this is a strong draft.
And this is an important class for the Mets. I mean, every class is important,
Of
but the
course.
last 2 to 3 years, and probably next year's too, are the big years in building an infrastructure, being the East Coast Dodgers, competing with the Braves. Just being able to have dudes in the system.
This is a loaded draft class.
Not sure I understand.
It's definitely a big year for the Mets. So I think firing Epler right before the draft, because again, if you're looking at general manager's job, you have to look beyond just all right, what's the team that's on the field?
Right.
Like it's not, it's more than that.
So much
So
more than that.
I think there would be big issues, and I think you also have to remember it was not an attractive job,
No.
not in the slightest. And the big issue was that the team president was meddling in baseball operations.
Mhm.
The Mets don't have a team president right now.
Right.
There are going to be people that want to wait and see who that is.
Yeah.
Because the Mets might not want to hire a president of baseball operations yet. They might want to go with another general manager, which would put him as a report to the president.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can get a president of baseball ops, that's a direct report to the owner. You don't have to worry about Sandy Alderson, whoever. So I think Epler's at least safe through the deadline. Because even then, if you're gonna fire your GM and tab an interim while you're trying to sell off pieces and also buy pieces to contend next year, I don't think you want a first time interim GM doing it because their options for interim GM are probably Thanos, Ian Levin, Ben Zosmer, guys who have not been a general manager before.
Right.
It's not like you have Billy Epler as your assistant GM who has done the job before.
Right.
There's a lot of experience in the Mets front office. There isn't a lot of
GM experience.
there's not a lot of top dog experience, just aside from scouting. With Thanos being the scouting top dog for 20 or so years. So there's gonna be a lot of discussion like, oh, you gotta fire this guy, you gotta fire that guy. I think people sometimes miss the optics of it, which are very important.
Yeah.
Jeremy Barnes was promoted so that he couldn't sign with another team.
Mm-hmm.
If you then turned around and fired him 2 months in, that's not a good look for then trying to hire a new hitting coach.
Yeah.
And I think that's another important thing is people want to talk about, oh, well, they'll just take the job because they're getting the chance to do this. If that was true, why did every executive the Mets try to interview say no?
Yeah.
Like there were manager candidates who decided they didn't want the job. Like these people still have the free will to not do the job and to not take the promotion. It happens all the time.
Sure.
So its optics are still important. So I think Jeremy Barnes survives the year. I think Hefner survives the year. I just think Hefner needs a new role. I'm not sure he's the come out in the middle of the inning. Hey, you're tipping your pitches. You got to fix it. Do this. Everything's fine type of guy. He's important to the organizational infrastructure. I just think he needs an organizational role.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to fire Chavez. If Buck gets fired, Chavez is the interim guy.
Right.
Not going to be Sherlock or Dick Scott.
Chavez just got promoted. It's the same thing that you're saying with Barnes.
Yeah, Chavez, Barnes, Hefner, they're probably all safe. But no, I mean, just considering the timing of everything right now, if the Mets lose, if the next 2 weeks the Mets go 4-9, 3-10, Buck's going to be the guy that gets fired.
Heads are going to roll.
But even then, are you going to fire? Like, what does firing Joey Cora or Wayne Kirby do?
Yeah,
like it's this current time of the year has Epler's job safe, especially considering he's a scout. And you can't fire a Barnes or a Hefner because a Hefner would get scooped up like that.
Oh, Hefner would have a job in 5 minutes.
It would be like what happened with Vic Fangio. He'd consult for the rest of a season and then immediately take a job the second something opens up.
Yeah.
Or he'd sit on his money for a year and then come back and take a job.
But for many reasons, this next month, I think is very important for 3 people to really step up. Number 1, Buck Showalter. Be the manager you're supposed to be. You're a manager of the year last year. Figure the shit out, man. I mean, I don't know what you've been doing. You got to figure this out, my guy. Number two, Francisco Lindor. I'm not trying to listen. The money aspect is, I think it's kind of overblown because if you look at it, so many people are overpaid. But you're getting $341 million. You're without Pete Alonso for next month. Now's your time to really step up as a leader. Lead this team. You've been better last week or so, I would say. Keep it going, man. You got to become the leader that we think you are. Lead by example. Take accountability. When your number's called, step up to the plate. And number 3 is Mark Vientos. You haven't got a whole lot of playing time. Now you're going to. These next 3 to 4 weeks, you'll probably be trotting out there 4 to 5 times per week. I know you're defensively, you're not that great. But offensively, put the bat on the ball, see what happens. You're doing great in AAA. See if you can carry it over here. And now, because my laptop's going to be dying soon, let's do the predictions. And I'm going to base it off of one question. As you know, Jack, today is June 10th, which means in exactly 1 week, I'm tying the knot, getting married, right? And then shortly after that, going on the honeymoon. I come back on June 27th. On June 27th, how far back from first place and the wild card are the Mets?
I'll say they're 12 games back of first place.
That's depressing.
Well, they're 9.5 right now.
I know.
I don't see it getting better, but I think there's some winnable games in their schedule. You know, they've gone in cycles all year. You know, and the cycle has unfortunately been painfully the same.
Yeah.
A nice 7 or 8 game hot streak, then you're mediocre for 3 or 4, and then you randomly fall off the deep end.
Yeah.
So who knows? I mean, they could win their next 7 games, and then you're only 3 games over 500. But it's Pittsburgh, the Yankees, Cardinals, Houston, Philly, Milwaukee. There are winnable games in there.
It's such a shame that it's going to be the Subway Series without Alonso or Judge.
Yes.
That's garbage. But
I mean, we have Billy McKinney, so it's fine. But
that's true. They have Billy McKinney. And Willie Calhoun.
Exactly.
Willie Calhoun and Tommy Pham, just like I wouldn't expect it.
I just don't see it getting better. I mean, I think I'm very good at separating being a fan from being real. And just being real here is it's an aging roster with veterans who it's not just like, oh, he's just having bad luck. He's making good pitches or hitting the ball hard. The back end of the front end of the bullpen is atrocious. Justin Verlander is incredibly concerning right now. Carrasco, his last start was not inspiring.
I thought it was fine.
It was fine, but he also very easily could have given up 7 runs in 5 innings.
Sure.
He was sporadic, left a lot over the plate. And it's just they're not hitting. I know they scored 10 runs 2 days ago and they scored 7 yesterday. But 5 of those 7 yesterday are garbage time. Like they're not hitting when it matters. Even against the Braves, left a lot of guys on base, missed some key at bats. Definitely did it against the Blue Jays. So, it's just they're bad in the most important parts of the game right now. They're not hitting with guys on, and they're not getting good starting pitching.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when they're good, when they were good last year, and when they've gone through their spurts this year, when they're at their best, they're hitting with guys on, they're building innings, and they've had good starting pitching.
Yeah.
But they have not had that. So I'm not ready to stick a fork in them, but my hand's on the drawer.
But you're preheating the oven.
Yeah. So I think by the time you're back, I will declare that it's time to stick a fork in them.
Oof. All right.
Which I mean also just means like they can still make the playoffs.
Yeah.
You could sneak in as an 86-win team. You might get shithoused in the first round. But it's nice to be there.
Uh-huh.
Put it in the banners. I mean, even if they make the playoffs, it'd probably be the most depressing playoff appearance in Mets history.
It probably would be.
Because I mean, that you're getting 3 seed. So whoever wins the Central.
And hopefully you could beat the Reds or the Pirates or the Brewers. I don't know. Who the hell knows? Way too early to talk about
Man,
stuff.
the Reds are so fun.
They're fun, but they're not good. They're fun.
I
Though.
think they'll end up being. I think they'll end up being fine if they're smart. They cautiously buy at the deadline, trade for a Carlos Carrasco, guys like that. Starters who can give you legit innings and probably put up a 4 ERA for you.
Jonathan India can get you a good return, I think.
Yeah, and you could. I don't know. They should buy dependable but cheap arms.
Yeah.
I mean, the Rich Hills of the world, the Carlos Carrascos. If Philly decides to sell off, I'm sure they can get something good for Strom.
Who the hell knows? I don't know. I'm hoping they're closing in on a playoff spot by the time I get back, but honestly, who the hell knows? I'm not even going to try to make a prediction.
Will Buck Showalter be the manager when you get back?
Yes. I'm going to say that confidently.
I think the only way he wouldn't would be if the losing streak hits 10 games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which would mean getting swept by the Pirates.
Yep.
After the Pirates got shithoused by the A's. And I think at that
Yep.
point you can start firing people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part would be fine.
But on that note, we're Antonio Slater and Jack Ramsey. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow on Twitter, subscribe on YouTube again, follow on Twitter again, subscribe on YouTube once again.
Call your therapist.
Follow on on Twitter and YouTube.
Call your therapist. Talk it
Call
out.
your therapist.
Yeah.
Hug your mother. I don't know.
Pick up a hobby.
Yeah.
Football's almost back. Football's almost back.
Football's almost here. But as always, LFGM. That made me sad.
Apparently, I'm proud of them. I haven't really pissed Cohen off.
Good. I hope it did.
Which is why. Because the initial thought was they're not going to panic fire anyone anytime soon.
Right.
Maybe like the same way the Tigers fired Avila August 1st.
Right.
Like they'd fire Epler and Buck August 1st or something like that. But I don't know. If this keeps up and Buck keeps doing his whole weird, I'm proud of him. We battled.
Blah 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 blah.
Like got to get the veterans going. Like he might not make it to July. They don't start winning games. I don't think he'll make it to July.
Yeah, they just gotta start winning. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, but I don't think they do.
Hooray!
I'll text you.
Yep. Later, dude.